I'm talking about We Have Demons, which of course is written by Scott Snyder, and the pencils are by Greg Capullo. The inks are by Jonathan Glapian, who drew a Spawn cover, a King Spawn cover that was like terrifying. Colors by Dave McCaig, and then letters by Tom Napolitano. Of course, for those who are new to the show, maybe missed this a little while back, I'd be surprised if you did, but we had Scott and Greg on the show at the same time before We Have Demons hit ComiXology. And for those wondering, why are we talking about it again and what's new with Dark Horse and everything? So these were released through ComiXology first. There's a deal that ComiXology and Dark Horse have, and now it's after a certain amount of months or whatever, these books are hitting the shelves over at your local comic shop as single issues. Actually, Snow Angels, I meant to tell you this, so I keep forgetting. I picked up the collected edition of that from that's Lemire
nice.
too.
Yeah,
I think, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So that's Lemire and Jock. That was available recently. Actually, it has an autograph, like an autograph print or whatever of hit from him and Jock in the cover. Which I'm like, do I give it to Joe? Do I not? I mean, he loves Lemire.
Snow Angels is fantastic. You read that sumbitch. Right
Another
now.
book that Joe talked about on the show a little while back. I got one thing in mind for our next trade whenever that actually happens. But anyways, I digress. So Joe has been waiting on reading this book for a long time because we decided to divvy up all of Scott's books that were announced in Scottober and everything. So you've been waiting for this one for a long time. Of course, the first issue is the hard copy. First issue is out this week. These are 3 double-sized issues, so essentially it's 6 issues. All of them are available on ComiXology right now. With the printed edition, because we did get a look at that one before this episode, before we recorded this rather, you get a note from Scott, which is kind of about Best Jacket and his plans going forward and everything. You get a little concept art too from Greg, and then you get a look at the entire first issue script too, which is kind of cool, especially for those who are really into, if you know someone who's interested in learning more about comics, or if you're just like a super fan and you want to get to look at what's going on between Scott and Greg. And, we've heard the stories from Greg himself about how he made fun of Scott years ago when they were first doing Batman, sending like these thick ass scripts to him and whatever. Not necessarily the same thing with We Have Demons, but the synopsis for the first issue of this series: the conflict between good and evil is about to come to a head when a teenage hero embarks on a journey that unveils a secret society, monsters, and mayhem. So kind of a generic synopsis, but I know on Change My Mind we say it quite a bit. If you got something good, especially if you got like some stars around it, and in the comic book industry, I mean, Scott and Greg are right there. You don't need to do too much to kind of sell this, especially when you got Greg's cover. I mean, you guys can see it behind me watching on on our stream, whether it's Twitch, Twitter, or YouTube. Friggin', crazy shit. Now I'll talk a little bit more about his art in a second. The main characters that we get for this series, I'm just going to leave it to 2. We do have quite a different moving pieces involved in this, but we get Lamb, short for Lamisu. She is the daughter of Pastor Cashel Cullen. And we get Cashel Cullen. We get a wild introduction to this preacher. Like in the first few pages, it's just like, wait a minute, what? And I know we on this show, like we talk about the first issue pretty loosely, but with this book being available now, in hard copy for the first time, there are a lot of people who don't have ComiXology, and I just don't want to. There's only 3 issues to this. I don't want to give too much away, but her introduction to that character is like, oh, what the fuck? For sure. So, and then with Lamb, her whole story is kind of more about to me, it seems like what Scott's kind of gone through in his life, and I'll get to that in a second. Then we get Gus, who normally I might have kind of left out of this conversation just again because of how when we get to know him, or when we first meet him, and then kind of when we get to know him. But I think Greg talked about him quite a bit when we had him on the show. And
loves Gus, yeah.
I was gonna say I'm pretty sure that's his favorite character. And there's a lot of weird ass stuff that goes. Like there's one line in particular where they're talking about the anatomy of Gus's species, and then the anatomy of the human species, and it's just they had fun with this series. There's no question about it. But he was Cashel Cullen's partner in Cashel Cullen's work outside of his church. And I'll tell you what, the first issue is the narration is all from Lamb. The second issue is all narration from Gus, which is an interesting decision on its own. But it's nice to get a little insight to the 2 characters. getting to know him a little bit more. I think with Lamb, we really need it, but honestly, with Gus too, with what everything that character kind of goes through, you need it as well. I think Gus though is my favorite character of the two, but a lot of twists and turns throughout the series. I'll touch on that a little bit in a second, but this series is definitely like number one thing is about faith. You got a preacher's daughter. I mean, it makes sense that you're going to be focusing on that quite a bit. But to me, what's interesting about it, because I remember, I don't know if I just from talking to Scott or if when we had him on the show, I can't remember, but like when it comes to him and faith, like that's not necessarily something he's going to be jumping out to write about right away. That's not his number one thing. But definitely like this is like an experience for him where he's talking like working through all of that himself through the eyes of Lamb. So I think I find that very interesting. You can really sense with this character where she has like quite a bit of resentment towards the faith. Someone like me who, has mixed feelings, depending on the day, I especially when it comes to organized stuff, I find that very interesting. So that's going to reel me in right away. We talked about narration and whether sometimes we like it, sometimes we don't. Said how there's like flip flopped a little bit. There's quite a bit of narration in this, but Scott and Greg are clearly trying to set up this like larger world. So it makes like you still set like in our world in a sense, but we're dealing with like demons and everything like that. So in different types of like hero teams in a sense. So it makes sense that they would instead of they would need a little bit of explanation throughout the course of this story, and it slows things down at times too. But at the same time, like Greg has an art style where it's like, yeah, I can things can move at a fast pace with him, but you also want to stop and appreciate his stuff. So it's not like you're sitting down and expecting this to be like really really quick with everything. But definitely a lot of like, oh shit, what happened? It's like things on the last panel, like when we're talking about the introduction to Lamb's dad and everything. But and then again, I mentioned a little bit about the narration. Like with what each character goes through, I'm curious if Scott's going to continue to alternate throughout the entirety of this series. Change things up a little bit in the final issue too. I don't want to get into that too much, but I just wonder how much back and forth he's going to be doing with that, with who's narrating the series.
Well, he's been experimenting with that in Nocterra too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right? That's right. So, he is doing that differently now. Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. And then with and I mentioned Greg's art and everything. I mean, this is like. I mean, his stuff is always going to be like friggin' batshit nuts. I mean, he's done Batman. We talked about Reborn. I did that on the show a little while back. Him and I believe it was Mark Millar wrote that. Loved that one. A lot of craziness in that. Obviously Spawn and everything too. I mean, you got Todd McFarlane saying he's like his favorite Spawn artist ever. This series, I mean, you get a lot of badass action. You get like not just like the action is bad. You get the quantity of it is like. A lot. And at the same time, when we're dealing with the demons too, these things are friggin' gross. So like you have this like amazingly cool polished art with the hero characters and everything, and then you have the juxtaposition with the demons, and it's just like, man, this shit's nasty. So I like that mix up in this. And then I touched on the ending a little bit, and I don't want to go too far into it, but man, the end, the first issue is like, okay, all around awesome. The second one is good. It gets pretty wild and everything. But there's this big twist. And I think that it's the second issue, and then even in more so in the third issue. And it's just like, well, shit. Okay. All right. I forgot this is a Scott Snyder book. Okay. That makes sense. So all around, like, really enjoyed this series. Definitely not like the fastest moving series that we're going to see, but like when it comes to the action, like that shit is like when it starts happening, like you could have like a few series of pages where you're getting into it. So really wild, really fun. I'm excited for the second arc. I mean, this is, if you like Scott Snyder, I don't know why you haven't read, unless you just don't refuse to get ComiXology. That'd be the only reason I don't understand why you've read this yet. Or if you're Joe and lost out on the coin toss fair and square, which happens to the best of us.
Fucking cheater. Yeah. I've been dying to read this. Now I've gotten to, read The Clear and Night of the Ghoul, both of which were phenomenal. But out of the two, as much as I love The Clear, the Night of the Ghoul really
when I'm dying.
Really became what a fucking phenomenal story.
Man, that first issue, because we got to read all of them because we got those early look when we had Scott on with Greg. Man, I read Night of the Ghoul and I was like, I have no regrets about taking We Have Demons first, but this is the book where I'm like, fuck, I wish we weren't doing this exercise. But I got that Jock book coming down the line too, and I can't remember how we divvied it up, but we got the notes somewhere. If not, we'll have to go back and rewatch the legendary coin toss. But yeah, so We Have Demons and May's book, both Dark Horse books. Of course, We Have Demons, a ComiXology original. Make sure you guys go pick those up, or at least get on May's book when the trade comes out. But I'm actually gonna get a hard copy if We Have Demons too, just to look at the script.
100%. Yeah, same here. Yep.
Oh yeah, you've been waiting on it, so why the hell not read it like that?